Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through some Week 5 trade targets.
Hike!
All right, Joe. So you and I are going to be giving two each. We're going to be referencing the Draft Sharks trade value chart to look at what makes most sense as far as what it would take to acquire those players and why we're suggesting that you go get them. So who's your first one?
Yeah, first player I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go with running back JK Dobbins. And one of the reasons I think this week could be a good week to go get him is they're currently on the bye. So I think sometimes the bye weeks, and we've talked about it on the trade shows before, can be, a decent time to go ahead and acquire a player. Maybe they need a player that they can actually start this week, depending on where that team's at, versus just having JK Dobbins, on their team and on a bye. And he honestly burst onto the scene the first couple of weeks of the season with some really good games. Last couple haven't been as good, but I think, this offensive line's been a little banged up as well. Maybe this bye week they get a little healthier. And I think once that line gets back to normal, JK Dobbins will go back to having some of those bigger games. And he's getting a lot of the workload on this offense. Honestly, Gus Edwards doesn't look that impressive to me. JK Dobbins is actually looking healthy this year, showing a lot of burst as well. So he's a guy I'd be looking to get.
He's got two legs this year.
Yes, as they would say, JK two legs. Yep.
Reference to the fantasy footballers there. And Joe Alt, missed the most recent game. He's been a huge impact for them as a rookie. Jim Harbaugh really believes in having a stout offensive line. So the bye week's certainly going to help if you are able to acquire him going forward. So based on that, Joe, what are you looking to trade in order to acquire J.K. Dobbins?
Yeah, I was surprised, honestly, that his value is decently high at 37. But honestly, I think somebody like Travis Etienne would be interesting, who's around there. Maybe even Tony Pollard's coming off of a big game. I'm not so sure if you could maybe take advantage of that as well. Just the fact that he had a touchdown and had a better game, because I don't exactly know what's going to happen with this Tennessee offense. Is Will Levis going to be the quarterback? Tajay Spears also looked pretty good in this game against the Dolphins. So that situation, I might prefer, J.K. Dobbins and a better offense.
J.K. Dobbins definitely looks like the guy. And it's not like the Chargers' passing offense is that prolific. So I think they are going to continue to rely on the run. That's Harbaugh's identity. And Edwards, really, like you said, really hasn't been in the picture. So could definitely make sense for him to be a target.
Yeah, what I like is even though he didn't perform that well these last couple of weeks, he still had 15 carries against Pittsburgh, 14 carries against the Chiefs, and 3 receptions. So that's 18 and 17 opportunities, and maybe that increases a little bit once after the bye week they assess things and maybe give the ball less to Gus Edwards ultimately.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So my number one trade target is going to be wide receiver Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. This guy wasn't my guy for me. I really believe that the connection between him and Aaron Rodgers is going to take him to another level. They've had some growing pains. They have not been the tandem that we thought that they would be. There's been a lot of frustration, it seems like, with that offense. But I do also think you have to look at the matchups he's had. He went up against Patrick Surtain. This past week, he has predominantly done very well against top receivers, although I know you're not a big fan of Surtain, but that's another topic for another day. Before that, against the Patriots, he went up against Christian Gonzalez, another young corner who has shown, if you look at all the measurables, PFF, what have you, he's done very well. So if you look at the matchups he's had to date, he's had some difficult matchups, and honestly, just him and Rodgers trying to gel. But if you look going forward, he's got some really nice matchups. He's got Arizona, the Colts. He's got Miami. He's got the Jaguars. He's got the Rams. So that's all in the second half of the season, really. So to me, it's like I think there are brighter days that come. And depending on, the owner, like, for example, I have him. I'm 1-3. if I were an owner, I'd recommend reaching out to me to try to get him. Now, I'm thinking I'm going to hold pat, but hey, if you're a winning team, you're 3-1, you're 4-0. This is a great time to get a guy who people were expecting huge things for. And you try to tell me all the time, Joe, it's a long season, so it's a good opportunity to go get this guy. So as far as his trade value goes, he is pretty high up there still. But I'd much rather have Garrett Wilson over a Tyreek Hill. We don't know his situation. Devonta Smith, even a Deebo Samuel, a guy who really can't stay healthy. So from a receiver standpoint, I think all those options could be a possibility. I think you could also, maybe trade, I think it'd be hard pressed to do it, but if you could do somebody like an Aaron Jones or a Devon Achane, I think that would be great. It's hard to really know. Garrett Wilson is one of those players who people maybe even draft in the first round. So they may have a hard time letting him go.
Yeah, I definitely think it'll be hard for people to let him go, but also maybe not, just because he's been a real disappointment here. Him and Rodgers definitely just don't seem to be clicking on the same page. That could still take some time. I mean, Rodgers didn't play all last year. Would have thought, though, he went through training camp and everything last year, and then, full training camp this time, that they'd be a little bit more on the same page. But for whatever reason, they just aren't clicking.
Well, there's all sort of factors that you can reference to decide whether or not you'd be interested in a guy like Garrett Wilson. One thing I think is interesting, which could help you acquire him, is he recently came out and basically was very critical of the offense, saying that he hasn't even ran that much of the route tree for whatever reason. So him, speaking ill will of the coaching staff is probably not a good look for Garrett Wilson. Number one, I would think that, coaching, they want to keep stuff internal. They don't want, players going to the media or social media for that matter, and saying these things. Number two, with the Devontae Adams news that he's now asked for a trade and the whole connection between him and Rodgers, and there's been so much conversation in the national, sports media talking about how, Adams is going to go back with Rodgers. If that happens, wow, that's a doomsday scenario for Garrett Wilson, because then he takes a back seat and now it's a Devontae Adams show. So I think there's enough.
Wilson goes to Vegas.
Which would be interesting, which I don't really know if I'd like that either, to be honest. I mean, that would be a foolish trade, in my opinion. I mean, he's a young player. He's shown a lot of promise. Adams, I think, is 31 years old. I mean, I don't know.
But their window is small here,
I guess, but that would be a wild trade. But either way, at the end of the day, there's enough, I guess, talk as far as him and different things that could be happening or things that don't make sense. I think there's enough of that could cause someone to be swayed to say, maybe it's best for me to, get the best return I can and say, see you later.
Yeah. I might prefer just to do that. I just don't know about him in this Jets offense, and we know Rodgers too does it. Like, if you don't have his trust, he's just not going to throw you the ball. And I'm just wondering if all these miscues and everything is just going to lead him to not trusting him. And will he just keep going more so with Allen Lazard, who he's really comfortable with, or you see Mike Williams getting more involved in there. He's able just to hit those back shoulder plays to him now. So just wondering if possibly Wilson may fall out of favor if he's not answering the bell or putting the work in to get on the same page.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I mean, it's frustrating, right? As a Garrett Wilson owner, seeing so much involvement in targets with Allen Lazard, it's like, what happened? Like, obviously, Wilson's the more talented player, but for whatever reason, like you said, Rodgers has a lot of trust built with Lazard. They played for a number of years. And so, Lazard's, a pretty active role in the offense. Plus, he knows the Hackett system, which I guess, Garrett Wilson does too for that year. But, at the end of the day, it's a different quarterback.
I don't really know what the Hackett system is. I know it's a lot of West Coast offense, but it's almost like Aaron Rodgers.
Wow, that's coming from a Broncos fan, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, Aaron Rodgers is the only guy that's ever really had much success with Hackett outside of Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville that 1 year. But it almost seems like it's Aaron Rodgers' offense, and maybe Hackett is like Adam Gase.
Well, who knows? Because now Robert Sala's talking about the Aaron Rodgers got to change the cadence. So who knows what's going on in that that coaching room? But either way, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to Garrett Wilson, I do think you're at a fork of the road. I I don't either. In my view, you're actively saying you could trade for him, you could trade him away, whatever you decide. I guess you could end up standing pat like me, but I do think he's at a fork in the road right now. We're going to find out. Would have been better off when we look back a couple of weeks from now. Would you have been better off trading him away? Or would you have been better off acquiring him? Time will tell.
Yeah, I still think you could wait one more week. I mean, they are playing in London. They got Minnesota. Minnesota's been really confusing a lot of teams and quarterbacks. I think it could be another dud week for them. And is that just enough to the another more pain of another week? Can that owner really hang on to this guy if you are looking to acquire Garrett Wilson?
Absolutely, yeah, you're not wrong. And then after that, he's got the Bills. So, which Bills, who knows? I mean, they've got a decent secondary as well. Their corners with Russell Douglas and Christian Benford have been pretty solid. So, it'll be interesting. He's definitely This is we try to talk about players that we think that you could actually trade for. We don't want to just come up with unicorn players that all that really doesn't make sense that trade can happen. There's enough noise when there's smoke, there's fire, and there's enough that I think you can make a trade with Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so who is your second player, Joe, that you're identifying as a trade target?
Yeah, I'm going to go with wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson. And, if you're following along with our waiver wire shows, this guy was on it. I happened to, pounce on him early on. He's still not that heavily rostered, just over 20% on ESPN here. But if you happen to be one of those leagues where he is rostered, I think you should go out and try to get this guy. Currently, his trade value is 18. I think, look, if you're looking at some guys that are around him, somebody like Christian Kirk, who's been disappointing, might be willing to do that. Cortland Sutton, even a Keenan Allen for that matter. If you play in a PPR league, Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be really valuable for you. He's currently averaging 13 PPR fantasy points per game. Just came off an 18-point game against Dallas, had 13 points against Cleveland, and he's getting heavily targeted. I mean, he's gotten 14 targets this past week, 8 against Cleveland. Week 1 against Minnesota, he had 12. And that's not to mention Malik Neighbors might not play this week. So this might be the time to go ahead and get him. And if Neighbors is out, he's just going to be that more utilizing this offense. But Daniel Jones, you want to talk about ADOT. He's not throwing it deep down the field. He tried that with Hyatt and just completely underthrew, or not Hyatt, but Slayton last week against Dallas had several times beat his guy and he's underthrowing him. He just can't throw the deep ball, but he can find Wan'Dale on the little 5-yard plays. And, with the target volume that he's currently getting, he's definitely valuable in PPR leagues.
Yeah, well, you see, when you mentioned Hyatt, I'm like, man, I hope that guy gets off the Giants team because he just doesn't fit the roster because Daniel Jones can't stretch the field to get him the ball. Same with Slayton. Right now, it's really those two guys, and that's really why I would say you're interested in him because right now the identity of the offense really is surrounding those two guys, Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors because he's shifty, Wan'Dale Robinson because he's a dump-off security blanket right now. I'm surprised you say to trade for him. I think there are enough. I don't know, like you said, he's not widely rostered to begin with. So to me, I don't think you'd have to trade for him. If you did, maybe you missed out. Maybe you didn't spend enough fab. He went to somebody else. I don't think you'd have to give up a lot. I can't imagine he was drafted in a lot of leagues. Most people probably picked him up on waivers. Usually I find, and maybe it's not true, for those who are tuning in here, but usually if someone was added on a waiver wire, I feel like it's a little bit easier to do a trade because there's not as much of a sunk cost involved. Like, I drafted this guy in the first or second round. Like, I don't know if I could trade him away, but it's like, oh yeah, I picked him up 2 weeks ago. Sure, I'll trade you. What do you want? I don't know. I think it's easier, if it was a pickup.
Yeah, even though it shouldn't come into play. Like, I don't care what the cost was. Like, we're in the season now. Whatever your roster is, it is what it is. And that really shouldn't cloud your judgment.
I get that, but it's the mind games, though. As people look at that as the opportunity cost of what you spent for the player and what you're giving away and what you're getting. It's like, last year when Puka Nacua did what he did, people could have been like, oh, I don't know, I can't trade you my second or third round pick for Puka. You picked him up on waivers. Now you would have been probably better off if you did that trade. But, people,
Yeah.
I kind of struggle with that sometimes too, because it almost feels like a loss. Like I could have had this guy, and I'm now trading
But
away
you don't.
a clear asset. I know, but and you
Yeah.
have a valuable member of your team, and you trade him away, and you could have had him. It's a
Yeah.
tough pill to swallow for
Yeah.
some.
I mean, I did see a tweet, and currently 60% of the Giants' target share is getting split between Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Neighbors. So
Wild.
it's just it's hard to go wrong with them, and just with sheer target share and the volume potential of them.
So my last trade target that I would recommend you go for is running back Brian Robinson Jr. of the Washington Commanders. This Washington Commanders team is tough. It's gritty. They performed. I think they've exceeded expectations from what others have thought that they would do. And I think the reality is he's getting great volume. Obviously Eckler was out last week. Before that, though, he had 16 attempts, 17 attempts. For 2 of the 4 games, he went over 100 yards. He had a touchdown in 3 out of the 4 games. So at the end of the day, he's getting the volume. He's being used. He's basically a borderline running back 1, running back 2 at this point. So I can, honestly, I'm surprised where his value is. I mean, if I could trade away a guy like Rashad White, even a guy like Travis Etienne, we talked about him. Tank Bigsby is continuing to be rotated in there. The Jaguars look like a mess. Sometimes it's just better to be a part of a more high functioning offense. And right now, the Jags are spinning out of control, where you've got the Commanders and they're clicking in on all cylinders. So, to me, if I'm able to trade those guys, even if Josh Jacobs is a guy, I wouldn't do a 1-to-1, but maybe you could do Brian Robinson plus, and be able to trade away a guy like Josh Jacobs. That could be appealing. So to me, you guys continue to get involved. He's running hard. He's getting a lot of volume. So I like him as an option.
Yeah, I do think he's interesting, and you're not wrong. The Commanders like to run the ball right now. The only thing that concerns me a little bit just is, like, he doesn't create a lot of those big runs, and I feel like he's just a very touchdown-dependent player. And when he's getting those touchdowns, he's going to be, have a really good week for you. You're going to be happy. But if he doesn't get in the end zone, I feel like you're going to be disappointed. And, I think just last week too, like you mentioned, Austin Eckler being out, I think really helped him, gave him all the volume. I know.
McNichols had a touchdown.
I was going to say McNichols was mixed in a little bit. He did get a touchdown in his own right. But Brian Robinson did, he was able to score early in that game. So, like I said, if he scores a touchdown, you're happy.
My only thing is I feel like with the identity of the offense, so they're trying to create, kind of reduce the pressure on Jaden Daniels and prioritizing running the ball. And it's not like Jaden Daniels has really a lot of options. If he has a old wily veteran in Zach Ertz, and he's got Terry McLaurin. I mean, other than that, there really hasn't been a lot of options on this offense to really support Jaden Daniels. So I think they're going to continue to have to rely on the run. But I hear what you're saying. He could be very touchdown dependent. Obviously, he had 3 touchdowns out of the 4 weeks. But either way, he's the type of guy. I like owning a guy like him or Eckler, because at the end of the day, if one of them drops or they get hurt, the other one's going to go nuts. So he's a good guy to have, regardless.
Yeah. I do think I tell you what, I would not trade Josh Jacobs for Brian Robinson though. Like you mentioned. The next 5 weeks here for the Packers, they're very good matchups, and their defenses that are currently giving up a lot of fantasy points across the positions. I think better days are to come for Jacobs, and if you want to, maximize his value, maybe wait a couple weeks, because I do think better games are here to come for Jacobs, and I'm not necessarily sure I would be willing to kind of sell him low.
Well, I hope you're right. As a Josh Jacobs owner, I've been very frustrated by the involvement of Emmanuel Wilson. But you're not wrong. He's gotten decent volume. He just hasn't. He hasn't gotten the end zone.
We also haven't seen. I mean, Jordan Love's only played 2 games as well, so we really haven't seen. I know his one big game was against the Colts, but everyone's having, outside of Najee Harris, everyone else is having really big games against the Colts. But we haven't really seen this Packers offense at full stride. With Jordan Love back there to really see what everyone can do.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about 4, 2 from Joe, 2 from Steve, some week 5 trade targets to go have your eyes set on and go get those players. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.